Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 9 of my 2021 reads. This week I finished 3 books and I DNF'd 2. The first book that I finished was Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky by Kwame Mbalia. This is part of the Rick Riordan Presents line. It is a middle grade portal fantasy about a black boy who is dealing with some grief. He has lost his best friend in an accident recently, and all he has left of his friend is his friend's journal, where they were recording a lot of folk tales and stories for a project they were doing for school. Except that one day a magical creature comes and tries to steal his journal, only for him to follow that creature and use his punching skills because he is a boxer, ending up punching a hole through the reality into that portal world and falling in. And that portal world is filled with American folktales and West African folktales, so things like John Henry and Anansi the Spider. And so he has to figure out how to fix the hole that he created. This is very much a great fantasy-filled middle grade. It has a lot of focus on kind of understanding how to deal with issues like grief, how to connect to other people, and a big focus on really knowing your stories, knowing your history. A lot of this is about the power of storytelling and how meaningful it is. And a lot of this really relates to kind of the history of being Black in the US. So a lot of the monsters in this are related to things like slavery. So there are these things called fetterlings, which are basically shackles that try to capture and take away people. And it's got a lot of layers of history, but in such a fantastical way that I think even young readers are just going to be thoroughly engaged in it. For me, this was a little bit too fast-paced. I like my stories a little bit more contemplative, and this was very much action-filled. But I think for younger readers, that's going to hit the mark perfectly. And there were also a few areas of things that were slightly illogical, but again, I don't know that younger readers are going to care so much about that. So for me, this was 4 out of 5 stars, and I definitely plan to read the sequel. Next, I finished The Dark Fantastic by Ebony Elizabeth Thomas. I buddy read this with Reija at the Book Finch, who I will link below, and I'm so glad that we buddy read it because this was a dense book. It was hard to get through. The content in it is really fascinating though. So basically this is nonfiction, very academic nonfiction, pretty dry as well, that is sort of literary analysis, looking at various types of books and media that are directed at a younger audience, so middle grade YA, that sort of thing, and the way that Black girls are portrayed, the way that magic works, and making the argument that really a lot of the power structures that exist in the real world are carried over into fantasy and exclude Black girls from really seeing themselves as the hero and from being represented and from participating, and just kind of making the argument that we need to change a lot of that, change the way that stories treat Black girls and empower them instead to be the center of the narrative. So there was a ton in this that was really solid in terms of those arguments, but it was so academic and so dry that without having Reija there to kind of unpack it all and discuss it with, it would have been very hard to get through. Also, I think I'm just not that familiar with literary analysis, so some of that was just very hard to read and understand exactly what was going on. If you're somebody who likes more academic writing though, especially if you're interested in sort of that meta-analysis of what's going on in the fantasy genre, I think that this has a lot of really good things to offer. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok Vaid-Menon, which is a very small little book. It's like 50 or 60 pages that is part of the Pocket Change series, and I'm very interested in reading the other ones after having read this. I heard about this one from Bek at MoonyReadsByStarlight, who I will link below, and they have very good recommendations when it comes to anything dealing with kind of queer issues, sexuality, especially when it comes to nonfiction. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out their channel. This was such a great recommendation. I really enjoyed it. I also think that if you liked All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, you probably will like this one as well, because it has that same feel of a little bit of memoir, but in this one, a lot more manifesto, a lot more of the guide to what it is to be non-binary and why it's important that we support sort of the gender spectrum. And really it kind of lays out all of these different arguments that people make as to why people can't be or shouldn't be non-binary, and kind of debunks every single one by one. I thought that this was just so compelling and did such a good job of analyzing gender in terms of power structures and really breaking it down and saying there's nothing biological and there's nothing like immoral or ethical or social or any of these things. It's all just about power. The reasons why we try to fit things into a gender binary, and we need to fight against those power structures to empower everyone to be themselves and recognize the validity of non-binary genders. So I thought that this was absolutely so well worth reading, and is only like 50 or 60 pages, so I highly recommend it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. In addition to the books that I finished this week, I did DNF 2 books, starting with Jill the Reckless, otherwise known as The Little Warrior, by P.G. Wodehouse. Sush has been reading me all of P.G. Wodehouse's works as bedtime stories, and so he had started reading this to me a few nights ago, and we got through 16% before I decided I just couldn't continue. I really enjoy P.G. Wodehouse's stories. There's a lot of humor and they're just lighthearted, but sometimes he has characters that get on my nerves, and this was the case here. So we follow a couple different characters, but the main one, Jill, ends up getting involved with a guy who I think the story wants us to like, but I found him so obnoxious and just not a good guy at all that I was getting very worked up as we were reading through the story, which is not the point of a bedtime story. So this one we had to DNF, and that's fine. There's plenty of other Wodehouse stories to read. The other book I DNF'd this week was A Duke by Default by Alyssa Cole. This is the second book in her Reluctant Royals series. I actually had picked up the first book in this series, A Princess in Theory, last year or the year before, and I'd ended up putting that one aside as well, DNFing it. But I'd heard some people say that the second book was even better, and since it's a companion series, you really don't have to finish the first one to move on to the second. So I gave this one a try, and it ended up kind of being the same for me. So I got through 27% of this, and although I liked some aspects of the story, I just wasn't fully engaged. So this is a story about Portia, whose life is not really going that well. She has trying to recover from alcoholism, and she keeps trying new things but not finding what works for her. She ends up applying to be an intern at a sword maker in Scotland, trying to get her life on track somehow, and she goes there only to find out that the master sword maker doesn't really want her there. The internship posting was done by his younger brother, trying to help out the sword making company, but he's very reluctant to allow her in, and he's supposed to be the hero. He's supposed to be sort of gruff on the exterior and sweet on the inside, but I couldn't quite get past the gruffness. So this story is definitely not bad, and I got through 27%, but I just couldn't buy into it. I think that it's supposed to be like a funny series, and I just wasn't that amused. It just wasn't clicking with me, and I wasn't really clicking with the characters. I kind of thought that Portia should just leave and go do other things with her life and not deal with this really rather unpleasant guy. I couldn't buy into wanting her to stay and be in that relationship. So I just didn't buy into the series, and there's nothing super wrong with it, but just didn't click. So I think that maybe the Reluctant Royals series is just not for me, although I do want to try some of Alyssa Cole's other works. She has some historical romance and some sci-fi romance, so as well as I think a mystery thriller. So I want to try some of her other things, but this series is just maybe not for me. Okay, so those are all of the books that I have read and DNF'd this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you have any thoughts, any recommendations, anything at all, just go ahead and leave me a comment down below.